So right now, the waves here are just sawtooth. Hey, let's just mute the drums completely. So now if I go, and this is just one oscillator, there's two. So now if I change it, you can hear I'm scanning through the wavetable. One of the main concepts of the album is control and how that manifests itself in different ways, from, insidious things like military to things like a crazy sound system on a dance floor that people follow in an almost cultish manner or something. So when I was looking more into control, I thought about diving into what the CIA was doing after World War II, and this came under these secret projects they were doing under the code name MK Ultra, which kind of came to light in the 70s, but they destroyed many of the documents. This whole section of the CIA was dedicated to learning how to control the mind, or to create the Manchurian Candidate, or to use it as a weapon to erase soldiers' minds or cause them concussions, remotely. One of the programs, for example, was called Perfect Concussion. And in this, they were trying to use extremely high amplitude blasts of sub-frequencies to try and cause a concussion in the mind. So they would hold subjects there and blast them with very low frequencies and see what that would do to the brain. They would also do it with high frequencies to basically try and erase memory, basically just frying your brain with super high frequencies or super low frequencies. So if you relate that back to a giant sound system, like in Berghain, for example, and how there's just such extreme bass when you're playing certain tracks or producing tracks to have this effect. So that's why I tried to play around a lot with these sonic sub-frequency blasts. So throughout the album you have, in tracks like Proxy Contact, for example, these very long drones, or in Depatterning, or during the freezing process of playing with the bass line and the kick almost being locked. So it's pulsing in 16th notes, kind of these bass lines, but at the same time there's high frequency kind of effect type sounds that are supposed to be more like these brain penetrating frequencies. Okay, so now I'm just gonna go into and then kind of break down the different parts and synth methods I had for the track Binding by Oath, which is from the album Scanning Backwards that I just released on Oscultone. Main thing I started with was that I slowed the tempo way down to 110 BPM. And I kind of just liked working with the slower tempo for this whole thing because to explore different sounds, and also kind of as a reaction to everything becoming so fast. And I think with this particular track, I was listening to a lot of Adrian Sherwood productions. Kind of had this slow electro, big beat kind of rhythm. And for my beats that I usually start with, I'm usually starting with the machine drum. It's the first Electron machine, and I still really love it. It's because all my other sounds are usually very gnarly and distorted. This is very clean and digital, and it just really cuts through the mix very well, and you can get very precise with it in terms of what frequencies everything is sitting at, and it doesn't have too much extra harmonic content, so you can fit it into a very busy mix quite easy. Just basic dry kind of sounds like this. Just the kick and the snare. The kick is from the analog modeling section of the machine drum, so this is supposed to kind of be like an 808 style kick. And then the snare is just a sample from an old Alesis drum machine. But with the kick for this one example, I like to run it through it's running through the Sherman filter bank. Now it's just completely dry, but as I can turn up the actual Sherman effect, which is just distorting it, and it goes I like to keep it a little with the dry signal in there just to keep the punch. And if I want to add more drums, I'm always all these kind of metal samples I have that I transferred into this drum machine. And all these samples that you put into the section here is 12-bit sampling, so it's really more like an old school 80s hip-hop sampler, so everything really has this grungy quality to it that I really like. Can add more reverb to it. And then also maybe it's a little bit more percussion to kind of add a more groove to it. Oh, this is just like just some rim shots also from the analog modeling section of the machine drum. And then I always just like straight up 16th note hi-hats. I just put them in. And for me, this is already like a quite good groove. But then the main part for me, of course, is always making a bass line. So maybe to show the next synth, let's just like mute everything except for the kick and the snare. So now I have also, I usually just sequence my synths also from the machine drum. So this is basically usually the center point of everything. I mean, I have this Doepfer MAQ down here, but for some reason I'm just always gravitating towards this. So I just have a 16th note bass line that's running on D sharp. We can turn it up here. So this is the Waldorf XT, which is a wavetable synthesizer. So this is also completely digital. So it takes the wavetables. So it's not taking analog waveforms, but it's taking wavetables from, say, a flute or a piano or a vocal formant or a metal hit or something, and they're all built in here. And then you could scan the wavetable with it. So it does really much greater variety of synthesis. And the filter section is also great because it's not just a low pass filter or a high pass filter or a band pass like it would be on an analog synth, but it has many different things. So this one, for example, is running through the wave shaper, so I can show. So it's going through a low pass filter and then through a wave shaper, which is something you would usually only find in a modular synthesis. But right now, the waves here are just sawtooth. Hey, but if I change it now, then we're going into the wavetables and you can hear the difference now. So let's just mute the drums completely. So now if I go, and this is just one oscillator, there's two. So now if I change it, you can hear I'm scanning through the wavetable. So this wavetable, for example, is square and saw. So from one side of the wavetable, this is the square wave. If I go to the other side, this is the saw wave. Now I just want to sit somewhere in between here. Maybe I like right about where this is sitting. And if we listen to the second oscillator, this is just the saw wave. Same thing. This is just an octave higher. Another thing that I like to do is make sure that the kick drum and that the synth line and the kick drum are in tune with each other. So what I do is I go into Ableton here, and I have like the input just from the kick drum. And you can see now on the tuner here, it says the kick drum's like around F. It doesn't have to be super accurate, but it's an F, and the synth line is in the key of D sharp, so it has nothing to do with each other. So what I would do is take the kick drum and I would just pitch it down a little bit. So now it's E flat, which is the same as D sharp. And now you can hear that it's like way more locked in. And the kick drum's still not around 40 hertz, which is totally fine to just like push through a club sound system. Maybe it'll sound weird in the DJ monitors, because usually DJ monitors don't go down that low, and you'll think, oh shit, my track has no bass in it. But it's completely untrue. If you're in a club with a great sound system, it's gonna just pummel the outside. But now what I also like to do is like make sure that all the drums are layered, especially the kick and the snare. So a lot of times I have like this kind of more analog sounding drum, 808, but then I like to put a drum sample on top from like a live drum. So I usually do that with the Roland TR-8S. Also has an SD card, you can load in all the different samples you want. Also, so for the kick now, I just doubled it up. For now, here you go. To add some variation, we could like add some rolls. But I really like to add a bit more funky hi-hats that are a little kind of just off kilter. I think one of the big influences always for me is Joey Beltram does this a lot. It's like not just an off hi-hat, not 16th note straight hi-hats, but something that's a little groovier. So with this, I just take the 808 hats from here and pitch them all the way down so they sound screwed up, and I got it. Also want to add some ambience. I always add ambience to the track because this is too dry. So what I usually do is I come over to the MS-20 and here I patched like a simple sample and hold patch. So you take the white noise to the end of the sample hold, take the clock from the LFO, and then the out of the sample and hold into the low pass filter. So we can hear, if I put this on, and we turn everything else off so you can just hear this. So this is just the noise from the MS-20. Nothing super crazy. But you could hear when the LFO is changing, that the tone of it's changing ever so slightly, very slowly. And then also in this track, most of my tracks I usually like to add some kind of harmonic element, some melody or something. And for that I always like to use this synthesizer, which is the Ensoniq ESQ1. I think most famously used by Skinny Puppy. Okay, so after kind of fleshing out all the different sounds and rhythms and kind of basic feel for the whole track, the next thing I would do is I record it. And I don't record it, I don't use the session section in Ableton at all. But I just use the arrangement and I just record the actual tracks into it. And for me, the most important thing to capture completely live is from the synth, because I would always kind of slightly change the filter and stuff like this. And also the patterns changing. And maybe in the break, I want to do something a bit more complex. And maybe I go through it like 2 or 3 times, and then I can just kind of splice and comp the different takes together till I have the thing I want. And of course, I can move stuff around if I want to change the arrangement later. So what I would usually do is I would just start, have the synth, and maybe in the beginning, just be like very low filter, and then I would control it coming in. And I'm only recording the synth now. And the drums I will just do later. And for the drums, I would just record each different sound. And I would just record, like 4 bars or something. And then from there, I can copy and paste it into the Ableton session. So you see here, of course, it's a little messy now. And this is the fully recorded and arranged track in Ableton already. But you can see I kind of just have the bits here, and they're just all recorded, and I loop them all. So next we can kind of go through how this is all laid out and everything. Of course, with some sounds, like the snare, I would record this all the way through, and then even if it's just a tiny bit, changing it all the way through the track, just so there's always like this slight amount of variation. I mean, it's almost like automation, but I'm just doing it by hand the whole time, which gives it a way more organic feel. Right? Another part that's not part of the track I was showing, but something that I do quite often and I wanted to exemplify was just using the guitar within a techno track. And what I usually do is I'm not playing it, I'm just creating noise with it. So it's just sounding like a noise watch. So now I basically turn this crazy guitar thing into more like a background ambience. So a lot of times for my ambiences, I'm either using the MS-20 or I just make this crazy guitar feedback. And that's kind of how you can create weird, different ambiences that are like tonally in touch with the track. In techno, usually, like if you're just using 808 and 909 drum machines, like classic, the kick drums, without, of course, without changing the pitch, are usually existing between 50 and 60 hertz. And this is more like hitting you in the chest. And then the bass line, you know, from your 303 or 101 or whatever is like kind of existing underneath around it or something. What I like to do instead is like change this dynamic and make the kicks super low and then having the bass line sit above it. So when there's a kick in one of my tracks, it's like punching you in the gut, or it's like making your insides want to come out. And for me, this is like this whole thing about control and using sound as a weapon and stuff, is like using extreme sub-frequencies that are way more weaponized and tailored to move your body actually literally in a certain way, because I think these frequencies is what's really creating a rhythmic thing and a very kind of weird sensual feeling or something is when you flip this dynamic and the bass line sitting kind of above it. And then you can fit so much more frequency content in there actually. You know, in the end I'm always thinking, not just thinking about it, but I'm always keeping in mind how these tracks work in a DJ set. So if you have this track where the frequency spectrum is carved out completely different than a normal techno track, so say it's like way more sub, way more mids, way more highs, kind of more of everything. When you DJ this over the other song, it's just gonna eat it, and like it's gonna be clear sonic difference when you're DJ this song compared to other tracks that are maybe more flat in their frequency response. So it's important to not mix with your eyes at all. And you can see even if I keep turning it up, it's not really becoming too loud, and it's not, even if I turn it up super loud, you can still hear the kick super clear. If you still really want to make sure the kick is cutting through, you can always just sidechain it a little bit. I use sidechain, and I'll take it from the top kick, because the other kick's too long to decay. So this, for me, is always what takes the most time. It's getting the kick and bass line dynamic together, because then after that, you just add everything on top, and it's almost just more, not technical, but subjective of what levels you want everything at. This is kind of my processed noise that I showed you before on the MS-20. So let's listen to a dry. It's just kind of sounds like normal noise, and what I like to do, make it pan back and forth slowly, and kind of put an auto pan on it once again, just like playing with the stereo field to make sure everything's not in the center, because then you're getting a flat mix, and with this it's becoming wider. And it's just more movement. And then I'm also like to use this Eventide H3000, and I basically just pulled up one of these more atmospheric presets, and then just change a few things in the filter. And it's just adding delay and more movement to it. And then also putting it through more reverb, 100% wet. And now that's pushing it to the back of the mix, so when you have it with the rest of the music, it's not taking up so much, you know. You can barely hear it, but if I take it out, you can feel that it's gone. So this just adds a little bit more sense of depth and room to the whole thing. So I always like to add in samples from movies or from, I don't know, a news broadcast or any kind of different thing to maybe set a certain mood or set a certain, not message, but just convey a certain character or something into the track, even though you can't understand what it is at all, and you will never understand what it's saying or figure out where it's from. But just, I think subliminally, maybe it does something to the track. And so here, for example, I took this and I just pitched it down a little, and I added a little bit of filtering to get out this other sounds from the film, like all the background noise and the music, and just a little bit of reverb and just a slight amount of detuning to widen it, to set it above, you know, the bass line and everything. So here it is, just dry. Here it is, just dry.
Maybe some city's gonna explode.
And then with the track, with this kind of slow electro beat, it almost gives it this kind of weird, almost like hip-hop feel now with the voice on top. And I only put it in a few times in the track, so it just makes it a little more special and not so repetitive. There's just one other sample I use. It's taken from an old song I like, and I just took the one little white noise burst, and all I did was just really crank it through distortion and through like a lot of detuning with the H3000, and there's just to add it, and also once again stereo, just to move it outside because it's also a snare sound, so I don't want it to sit on top of the other snares that are kind of in the center already. They're just alone. And I always like to add these accents every once in a while on the track on top of this snare because it's just, I don't know, for me it's just something I like to do, and it kind of just became part of my sound and stuff to add these kind of white noise bursts, and it's just kind of a little old school wavy. And it always acts as a good way to like introduce a new sound or to take away or kind of move to a new part. Okay, so originally the track was supposed to end here. But I always like the idea of these tracks having like kind of these almost false start and stops. So all I did then was just making this break here, and it ended with the bass line, and then I automated on the Ableton here in the delay, and I just did it by hand, turning up the feedback here. I mean, now it's recorded, so it's moving on its own. But what was really beautiful was I just duplicated the section over again. And for whatever reason, these happy accidents happen sometimes, even in the computer, that when it jumps back down, I created this very weird, super dubby echo effect. And it just kind of, for me, that like almost made the whole track in the end, was having this like last bit here. And you see, like I just muted the whole bass line, and it's made like a very nice outro.